As I said, the needs of the recipient need to be linked to the family priorities, community programs, and national objectives. It's not a bottom-down approach, and it's not a bottom-up approach. It's an appropriate linkage of the two that we need to be concerned about. If we're going to have sustainable programs, communities need to be aware of the problem. They need to be given a choice of what solutions might be appropriate to their context. They need to be empowered to do something about it within their own resources where those are available in order to create public demand for continuation of these programs. I'll skip over this. It's just a scheme to show how communities themselves can be involved in identifying the problem, of taking action based on their own resources, and of monitoring their progress. Jim Grant has said that each of the great social achievements of recent decades has come about not because of government proclamations, but because people organized, made demands, and made it good politics for governments to respond. We've had these political statements made at several large gatherings that Dr. Scrimshaw referred to. He had a later slide than mine. He got the Montreal conference onto his. But these proclamations have now been made. It's really up to us who work in these countries to now and work with the people, the national leaders, to develop the appropriate program to take care of this problem of vitamin A deficiency in the developing world. And it's my own belief that this is fully achievable by the end of this century, based on the political commitment we now have for doing something about it. Thank you very much.
Don't run away, Barbara. Thank you very much, and frankly, you ought to be congratulated for the efforts you've gone to transfer basic information concerning vitamin A, nutriture, and function to the field where ultimately that is where everything matters. We do have time for a question or two, and I'd like to ask you one question of a fairly basic nature. In terms of subclinical avitaminosis A, to what extent may the functional consequences of that degree of avitaminosis A be due to a low availability, if you like, and involvement of retinoic acid rather than retinol and retinaldehyde? I know it's a fairly basic question, but would you care to sort of speculate?
Well, when we're at the basic level of the cell, it's probably outside of the visual cycle, retinoic acid, which is the active form of the vitamin. But in food sources, you don't find much retinoic acid. You get your food sources are the ester, primarily some alcohol, but it's mainly retinol esters in food. But then its conversion, its real molecular basis for its action is probably through retinoic acid.
Do you have questions? Let me just ask you another question then. Oh, sorry, Professor Scrimshaw. Ask your question.
I would like to know the interaction between iron and vitamin A.
I knew he was going to ask that. This is an interaction that was reported several years ago, and Dr. Karyadi here in the audience observed it in Indonesia. Others have observed it in Latin America, in which when you have severe vitamin A deficiency, even when it's not at the level of clinical eye signs, there seemed to be some inhibition in the utilization of iron that's not relieved by giving iron alone, but only when you improve vitamin A status. Now, this is an interaction that really needs to be explored a lot more, because some of these effects that we're seeing on mortality may in fact be due to an underlying poor mobilization of iron because of the vitamin A deficiency. And when we relieve the vitamin A, we improve iron nutriture as well, and it may actually be through that mechanism that we are, at least in part, seeing effects on mortality from supplementation with vitamin A. It's an area of research that needs a lot of more study right now.
Would beta carotene be a theoretically useful source of vitamin A activity?
Well, the source of vitamin A in most of these diets in the developing world is not vitamin A itself, but carotenoids, and beta-carotene being the most vitamin A active carotenoid in these plants. The other thing about carotenoids, which you get through the plant sources, dark green leaves and deep yellow vegetables and fruits, is the fact that I know of no case of toxicity that has ever occurred when it is a food source of beta-carotene, including populations in Africa where red palm oil is used for a lifetime in abundance. Beta, or the carotenoids, are perfectly safe for women during pregnancy, whereas high-dose vitamin A capsules given early in pregnancy have a risk factor associated with them. I guess this is one of the reasons why I'm such a strong proponent of food as the main intervention program that can safely be applied in trying to relieve the problems of vitamin A deficiency in children as well as in pregnant and lactating women and others.
Here's your pointer, Barbara.
Thanks a lot. At least I got it for you.
Perhaps we ought to move on. Thank you once again for your contribution. Our next speaker will be Ernesto Pollard, who perhaps more than anybody has been responsible for establishing and investigating and describing the nature of the relationship between long-term nutritional experiences and cognitive function and learning and behavior. Ernesto is also a long-time colleague of Nevin, and he spent a number of years with us at MIT and then decided to go to browner pastures, I guess, and went down to Houston and then moved to Davis, where he is currently Professor of Human Development in the Department of Pediatrics at that university. It gives me great pleasure to ask you to make your presentation, Ernesto, that I know, as usual, will be an excellent and well-timed one.
It is with great personal satisfaction and with a sense of professional pride that I participate in this meeting to honor Nevin Scrimshaw, the 1991 recipient of the World Food Prize. What else can I say that has not been said in the last 36 or day and a half? And I speak about Nevin as a productive and creative scientist, as a man with a powerful intellect, as a public health person committed to the combat of hunger and malnutrition in the world. Well, I wouldn't be adding much to that. But I would like to add a personal note. I spent all my professional life and many, many years in the study of the relationship between malnutrition and behavioral development. If you really look at the roots of this area of research, it can be traced back to the beginnings of the 20th century. But the impetus for its development came in the mid-1960s, and it was really Nevin who was primarily responsible for it. In 1968, he organized at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology an international conference on malnutrition, learning, and behavior. One outcome of this conference was a book edited by Nevin and by the late John Gordon that became an obligatory reference in the area. The pioneering work presented at the meeting was a landmark, and my whole professional career and my life was influenced by it. The evidence I will present today, 23 years after that meeting, is, I believe, a testimony that the time and effort that Nevin invested in the development of this area of research has paid off. His view that malnutrition can have a profound influence in the cognitive and social emotional development of children is, in my opinion, confirmed to a large extent by the data that I will present. I really thought a lot about what to present today. I wasn't sure about the composition of the audience, and I thought, well, maybe I can give an overview of the whole area. But I decided against it because I had the opportunity of actually presenting some new information that is fairly unique because it actually shows the developmental effects from early childhood to late adolescence and young adulthood. The study was actually originated at INCUP, and I did not participate in the beginnings of this study. It was originated in 1969 at INCUP, the institute that Nevin helped create. Now, I ask for your forgiveness for being very specific at some points in time in this presentation, but I thought that it was worthwhile because I really wanted to present the evidence to Nevin. Conceptual and methodological problems have precluded conclusive inferences from any one experimental or quasi-experimental study in isolation on the functional consequences of early supplementary feeding in nutritionally at-risk populations. It is only by pulling data from different studies that strong suggestive inferences can be drawn. At this point in time, it is justified to infer that early supplementary feeding does, in fact, have statistically significant beneficial developmental effects in infancy and in the preschool period. What remains undefined and what has not yet been published is whether such benefits extend into late childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. Such a gap in the information is part filled by what I'm going to report today. These are the results of a 1988 follow-up of the subjects included in a longitudinal study launched in rural Guatemala in 1969. The original working hypothesis of that study was that early protein supplementation has a significant effect on mental development among nutritionally at-risk children. In 1969, one of two dietary interventions were randomly assigned to two sets of 2 villages each. One intervention was a high-calorie, 163 kilocalories per 180 ml, high-protein, 11.5 grams of protein supplement. The other was a low-calorie, 59 kilocalories per 180 ml. The high-calorie, high-protein supplement I will label Atole. The low-calorie supplement I will label Fresco. Both sets of villages received the same amount of micronutrients per unit of volume of the supplement. A first analysis of the 1988 data from the follow-up. Could I have the first slide, please? A first analysis of the 1988 data from the follow-up focused on treatment effects on those children who received both prenatal and at least 2 years of postnatal supplementation. The outcome variables included psychoeducational tests, which are tests of literacy, tests of numeracy, tests of general knowledge, vocabulary, reading, and information processing tests, for example, simple reaction time. After controlling for socioeconomic and schooling variables, there were clear statistically significant differences between Atole and Frescoed populations at the time of the follow-up. In other words, we had fairly strong evidence that after, from 1969 to 1977, receiving the supplement, in 1988, there were significant effects among both males and females in a test of numeracy, in a test of general knowledge, in a standardized test of reading, and a standardized test of vocabulary. I want to point out something very important. Most studies that have been published on supplementary feeding that have showed beneficial effects in the infancy and in the preschool period have shown an effect of about 0.2 to 0.25 of a standard deviation. The effects that we were observing, particularly in the two last tests, in reading and vocabulary, were actually tests of the differences of a magnitude of about 0.75 of a standard deviation. The theoretical and programmatic implications of the data are enormous because they actually show a very significant effect from early supplementation on later performance. I have been extremely concerned with trying to look at alternative hypotheses that would explain the differences, alternative non-nutritional hypotheses. And as I will discuss later, I have not been able to come up with any one alternative hypothesis that actually competes with the nutritional hypotheses. But I think the strongest evidence of a genuine nutritional effect comes from the present analysis. The results of the first analysis of the 1988 follow-up are compatible with the original hypotheses that protein deficiency had a limiting effect on mental development. However, the possibility that the beneficial effects of the Atole on cognition and achievement were due to other nutrients besides protein could not be discarded. In particular, energy consumption also differed significantly between supplements, and such differences could well explain the observed developmental differences in adolescents. My presentation focuses on the issue of the differential effect of protein and energy and discusses the possible role of micronutrients. In contrast to the original report that I just mentioned, which focuses on the original hypotheses and discusses the differences between treatment groups independent of timing and magnitude of supplementation, my presentation accounts for these two key variables. The effects of the pre- and postnatal intervention are analyzed separately, and within each time of exposure, comparisons are made between groups with high and low levels of supplementation. Energy intake was used in the present analysis as a main indicator of supplementation, since energy protein and energy micronutrient ratios were constant in each type of supplement. Based on the level of energy intake, the subjects in the present study were divided into a high and low supplemented groups by gender and by treatment. The Guatemala early supplementary feeding study was carried out in 4 rural, non-Indian, Spanish-speaking villages in the department of El Progreso in eastern Guatemala, and included 2 distinct periods of data collection. The study was conducted by NCAP staff and began in 1967 and spanned to 1977. while a follow-up in which I participated, I did not participate in the original longitudinal study, was carried out in 1988 and 1989. As I mentioned before, the study included 2 village pairs. One pair was large, about 900 people, and the other small, about 500 people. One village in each pair was randomly assigned to the atole, a high-calorie, high-protein supplement, and the other pair to the fresco. Both preparations contained the same amount per unit of volume of minerals and vitamins. Supplements were distributed twice daily from 1969 to 1977 at a feeding center. Attendance was voluntary. Preventive and curative medical care was made available to all participants. Target groups were pregnant and lactating women over 15 years and children up to the ages of 7 years. The sampling frame for the follow-up, 1988 follow-up, is defined by those subjects included in the longitudinal study. Based on theoretical considerations regarding developmental vulnerability, subjects selected for the present analysis included those with pre- and postnatal supplementation up to 2 years of age. In other words, they had to have supplementation throughout pregnancy and throughout the first 2 years of life. 364 subjects were included, about 90 to 100 subjects per group. The prenatal supplement is defined as the mean daily energy intake during pregnancy. Within gender and treatment, subjects were divided into 2 categories using the respective median value of the energy intake, that is, high and low supplemented groups. The median values were 112 kilocalories for the atole males, 99 for the atole females, 82 for the fresco males, and 74 kilocalories for the fresco females. There were no significant gender differences in prenatal supplementation. The postnatal supplementation is defined as the mean daily energy from the supplement recorded in 3-month intervals received by subjects from birth to 24 months. Thus, all subjects who received supplementation in any of the measurement intervals during the first 2 years of life were included. As in the case of the prenatal supplementation, the subjects were categorized as high and low supplemented groups using the median energy intake as previously defined. It's important to note that the cutoff points for the postnatal energy intakes were, and here is an important piece of information, 69 for the atole males, 85 for the atole females, only 8 for the fresco males, and 7 kilocalories for the fresco females. There were no between gender differences. The RDAs were used to weigh the relative importance of the nutrient intakes, that is, energy, protein, and micronutrients, between subgroups. Note that there is no physiological reason to assume that the percent units are equivalent across nutrients. A shortfall of 10% of any one nutrient may have vastly different consequences than that for another nutrient. We use this approach as a way of describing differences in nutrient intakes among subgroups by means of an external criterion. There are some important confounding variables, as one you would expect in a study such as this. House quality, mother's education, chronological age, the age at which the school entered school, and academic achievement were used as confounding variables. By including schooling variables, those who did not have schooling records are excluded from the present analysis. The percentages of school subjects vary between villages from 65 to 87% among males and from 73 to 84% among females. We used 2 psychological test batteries to assess 2 distinct domains of cognition. A psychoeducational test battery, as I previously mentioned, included tests of reading, numeracy, general knowledge, the Raven's progressive matrices, and 2 standardized achievement tests of reading and vocabulary. This is an example just of one of the tests that we used. The purpose of the test is that the individual has to choose from the 4 alternatives in the bottom to replace the absent figure in the top. The second battery that we used was an information processing test battery, which included primarily reaction time measures, but I will not speak about this because of reasons of time. Could I, can you stop this slide, please? As observed in this table, the mean energy and protein intake from the supplement was much higher in the Atole as compared to this Fresco group, as you would expect. These differences were observed in the pre- and postnatal period. However, as it is evident by the size of the means, the magnitude of such differences in energy intake was much larger in the postnatal as compared to the prenatal period. Prenatally, the high Atole group had the highest amount of energy and protein intake, but their micronutrient intakes were lower. I would like we can't go over this in detail, and I would just like to mark some specific patterns. These are, let's use only the males. If you look at, here is Fresco, and here is the Atole, the low and the high. As you can see, there are relatively small, that there are large differences in high and low Fresco intake in energy. Of course, there are no differences here from the supplement in protein. However, the micronutrient differences are quite large. In addition to that, what is important to note is that the micronutrient intake of the high Fresco is higher than the micronutrient intake in the Atole group. Postnatally, on the other hand, the picture changes quite a bit. As you can see, the actual intake of the low and high Fresco in terms of RDAs for energy intake is relatively low in both instances. Moreover, the micronutrient intake here in the high, which was much higher in the prenatal period as compared to the Atole, now is reversed. In other words, in the Atole high, you have a much greater intake of micronutrients as compared to all the other groups. For the purposes of the analysis that I will present, we have actually controlled for all the confounding variables that I listed before. Could I have the next slide, please? I will only present data for in two specific test results. The two upper quartiles referred to the prenatal supplement. The two lower quartiles referred to the postnatal supplement. The left-hand side refers to males. The right-hand side refers to females. As you can see, there is an impressive monotonic function. Both prenatally and postnatally, there is a clear increase in performance as a function of whether you go from low Fresco to high Fresco, from low Atole to high Atole. What is indeed remarkable is that this monotonic function is found throughout all the different tests that we have given. However, the largest number of significant differences are found in the postnatal supplementation. The differences between the high Atole and the low fresco are statistically significant in all instances, and the differences in some cases are larger than 1 standard deviation. What is also interesting is that in some cases, like for example, at the lower quartile on the right-hand side, you can see that there are differences between the high fresco and low fresco. And those differences could only be attributable to micronutrient differences, because there were no protein differences, and at the same time, as I mentioned before, the differences in actual caloric intake were indeed very small. This is perhaps the most important of all the findings that we have. This is a composite score. Is a score that was derived from a factor analysis of all the psychoeducational tests. And as you can see, there are again very large differences that follow a monotonic function, and the differences between the high atole and the low fresco are very large. Again, in some cases, you can see that there are also differences between the fresco, the high fresco, and the low fresco. These findings confirm the result of our previous analysis and further clarifies the effect of early supplementary feeding on functional consequences in adolescents. In particular, the present analysis uncovered the differential role of pre- and postnatal supplementation, as well as of the level of consumption of fresco and atole. Pre- and postnatal supplementation each made an independent contribution to the better performance of the atole subjects as compared to that of the fresco subjects. Similarly, the amount of supplement consumed made the difference in terms of test performance. As I already have noted, previous published analysis of the longitudinal study have suggested that the effect of energy was more important than that of protein in terms of growth and developmental changes. This suggestion was made on the similar magnitude and direction of regression coefficients between supplement intake and outcomes within the atole and fresco groups. However, such an assumption failed to account for the differential intake of micronutrients. As it is suggested by the analysis reported, the differences in micronutrient intake appear to be functionally meaningful. For example, in the case of postnatal fresco supplementation, the high and low intake groups were 1% and close to 0% respectively. On the other hand, the percent RDAs for iron was 3% for the low and 13% for the high intake groups. Similarly, in the case of vitamin A, it was 18 and 78% for the low and high intake groups respectively. Thus, while it is on the one hand unlikely that the negligible differences in energy intake could have had a functional significance, it is conceivable that the differences observed in test performance in this particular case and in 2 other cases between the high and low fresco groups depended in part on the differential consumption of micronutrients. Although the data do not lend themselves to more specific analysis of the role of micronutrients in this study, it is clear that such a role cannot be discarded. A remarkable finding of this study is the consistency in arithmetical stepwise progression of the functional performance scores of the 4 different groups. We have carried out a trend analysis, and we see that in almost all instances, there is a statistically significant trend from low fresco to high atole. The study design used in the longitudinal Guatemala study has inherent limitations. It was a quasi-experimental study, and also there is a lack of contiguity between the exposure to the treatment and the measurement of the outcome variables. which in turn do not allow us to make any inferences of a causal relationship between the intervention and the outcome. Concerning judging probable cause, we have examined the potential threats to internal validity, including the following 4 issues. Pre-treatment differences between villages. 2, differences in the implementation of the treatment. 3, selective attrition and recruitment of the sample. And 4, differences in the history from the time of treatment implementation to the 1988 follow-up in the villages. None of these 4 alternative hypotheses support the available evidence. Thus, it is not only plausible, but also highly probable that the differences in nutrient intakes from the early supplementary feeding account for the differences in functional performance seen in adolescence. However, the present analysis have also shown that it is not plausible to define which nutrient determined the test performance differences. The attributions that have been made to energy in relation to functional outcomes may not be justified. The inference that qualitative and quantitative differences in early supplementary feeding accounted for the differences observed in mental function leads to 2 interrelated questions regarding the nature of such effects. Namely, what are the mechanisms involved? And 2, why do different nutritional supplements result in similar functional effects? In particular, this second question addresses the issue of the similarity between the differences of those involving the high atole and low fresco comparison and those of the high fresco and low fresco comparison. It is recognized that the differences in the former are more clear and pervasive than those differences in the latter comparisons. Yet the issue remains that those 2 sets of comparisons that involve actually different nutrients have similar outcomes. An attractive explanation is that a comparatively high intake of the supplement, independent of its composition, had a preventative effect. At least in part, a high intake of atole and fresco would have safeguarded the central nervous system from the anatomical and biochemical dysfunctional changes presumably associated with protein energy malnutrition and micronutrient deficiencies such as iron. Thus, particularly among those with a high intake of atole and fresco, the supplement had a direct effect over brain growth and function, resulting in an overall healthier development. A problem with this explanation, however, is that it is strictly conjectural and also lies in a vacuum of information. No conclusive evidence exists in the neurosciences to support a proposition that the level of malnutrition, mild to moderate as observed in the Guatemala cases, results in neural changes having functional significance. In fact, data accumulated within the last decade in developmental psychology supports a contrary view, namely that the trajectory of mental development is seldom set by a single biological stress factor present in early life. A second problem with the explanation of a neural change is rooted in the test data itself. In opposition to what is theoretically viewed from a perspective of direct effects of the supplement on the central nervous system, the most clear effects are not found in the information processing task, which I did not present, which would reflect better brain function. The tests that actually show the greatest amount of effects are the vocabulary and reading tests, which are heavily dependent on the influence of the educational and social systems within the cultural environment. In connection with the differential effects of the supplement on this form of mental performance, which I called crystallized intelligence, it is important to note that the magnitude of the supplement observed in adolescence is much larger than has ever been reported before in infancy or in the preschool period. For instance, while the effects observed in the mental test administered in the infancy and preschool period between Atole and Fresco were in the magnitude of about 0.2 to 0.25 of a standard deviation, those observed in adolescents here are as large as 1 standard deviation. Thus, it appears that as the subjects grow older and more exposed to the educational and social environmental influences, the effect size of the supplement increased. The interpretation of the effects which I favor, and I would like to put forward, supported by theory and by data, stems more from a systems view of growth and development, and posits that without having to have any direct effects on brain growth, the high intake of both Atole and Fresco still had a preventative effect on mental development. In particular, the suggestion is that through its effects on physical growth, motor maturation, physical activity, and their arousal activation system, the supplement shielded the organism from having a dysfunctional interaction with the environment and facilitated the acquisition of educational and social information. Protein and energy on the one hand, and micronutrients, particularly zinc and iron, on the other, have been associated with physical growth in the infancy and preschool period. Similarly, both sets of nutrients have been causally related to motor development and to the arousal activation systems, and energy has been related to physical activity levels. A key component of the proposed model is that body size, motor maturation, physical activity, and arousal, which are affected by protein, calories, and micronutrients, act synergistically in the developmental process. All these parameters of the physical domain of the organism shape, to a large extent, the patterns of interaction between the organism and the physical and social environment. For example, it is well established that self-directed locomotion increases social contacts and broadens the social experience of infants and facilitates visual perceptual development. Accordingly, through its well-demonstrated effect on the physical world of the child, the nutrient supplement shaped in part the accommodation of the children to the environment and facilitated the development of crystallized intelligence. At issue here is that the true magnitude of effects could only have been observed through a long-term longitudinal study, because the entire developmental process was affected, having a cumulative effect. In light of what I propose, it is not difficult to understand the issue of what I called equifinality, or how different nutrients have similar developmental effects. It is not because all affected the same regions of the brain, but they all affect the physical domain of the developmental process, and through it shape the interaction of man with its environment. I believe that the effects of nutrition and development now may be much larger than what we had ever suspected before, and it is to a large extent due to the impetus that Nevin gave to this field that we may have now these findings. Thank you. Sorry for the time. Sorry for the time.
Stay here a minute. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for summarizing so clearly such an important study and its evaluation. I love your proposed model and the sort of systems assessment that you have taken to attempt to describe the nature of the basis for the outcome that you describe. Are there some questions? Nevin, this was all addressed to you.
I'm thrilled.
It's marvelous. Darwin? Would you repeat the question, if you understood it?
Well, so Michael Crawford from London he just published also some importance of role of fatty acids, sense of fatty acids on the brain development of the cells, cell life. So it seems that there is a tremendous interest in this essential fatty acid neuron development. So I'm wondering whether this also some relevance in supplementation since not there.
The question is, to what extent the effects, the supplement had effects on brain growth. I don't think that that can be discarded at all. In other words, there are many people working in developmental nutrition and in connection and working in the area of brain growth that would actually defend that proposition. I think that the data that we have on effects of specific nutrient deficiencies in animals refers primarily to more severe cases than what we have tested here. There is really no evidence in man that mild to moderate forms of protein energy malnutrition may have effects on brain growth. The hypothesis is a very attractive hypothesis. However, in my view, it is very difficult to actually utilize this model to explain such large differences that we observe in adolescents.
Just one more question. Yes?
You compare these different groups with each other. How do they compare with the overall population? Are the supplemented individuals, the ones on high and total supplementation, do they have better than average performance or average, or how do they compare?
How do they compare with the overall population is the question. This is, I can only mention two characteristics of the population. One is that approximately 20 to 25% of the population were severely stunted at 3 years of age. That gives you an idea, more or less, of the degree of malnutrition that they had. And two is that the mean years of education is actually 3.1 years in one group and 3.8 years in the other group. So in comparison to the overall population of Guatemala, and I may stand corrected, these rural population, these 4 villages are worse off.
Thank you very much, Ernesto. That was truly a masterful presentation. Our final speaker in this morning's session is again a long-time colleague of Nevin and a scientist that I highly admire and a good friend. Riccardo Bressani was director of the Division of Food Science and Agriculture at INCAP for many years, where he now serves as a senior investigator. Riccardo is actually a graduate, a distinguished graduate of this distinguished university, having obtained a Master of Science degree at some stage during his illustrious career. Riccardo is a foreign associate of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, of which there, I think, are about 250 out of the potential multi-thousands of scientists worldwide. So this gives you some indication as to the very high regard with which he is held in terms of his scientific contributions and credibility. Riccardo, it's a pleasure to introduce you.
Thank you very much, Vernon, Dr. Scrimshaw, ladies and gentlemen. As we were driving from Des Moines to Ames this morning, I was sleepy, having some coffee. And my mind went back some 40 years. And I'd like to share this with you. 4 years ago, I graduated from Iowa State University. I remember also that during the winter times, I used to cross Lake Laverne on foot, to go to classes. My daughter, my first child, was born in Ames. I will ask her one of these days to come and visit because it has changed so much. And maybe Dr. Scrimshaw doesn't remember this, but I was attending a meeting in Chicago having to do with the research problem I was working on here that had to do with carotenoids. And he was introduced to me by a professor of Iowa State University that had been in Guatemala for some time, Dr. Melhos. And since then, he offered me a job at INCAP. I accepted. And since then, we developed a really tremendous relationship, academic as well as personal, in which even our families became involved. So it's really homecoming to me. During these years, I have come to admire and respect Dr. Scrimshaw very much. He really is a tremendous friend. Well, the paper that I'm going to be discussing with you during the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes, has to do with some of the work that Dr. Scrimshaw initiated when he became director of INCAP, and that is the problem of the development of high-quality foods to meet nutritional needs. And so if I may have the first slide. As you heard already during these last two days, the problem of malnutrition is a problem that is very, very complex. And there are many causes influencing the extent of malnutrition in children, in women, pregnant and lactating, and also in the population. And of course, these factors can be grouped into social, economic, and ecological and political factors. And these are factors that have individual influences on malnutrition, but they also interact with each other. And not only they interact with each other, but the weight that each has in a formula like this depends many times on the situation in which the problem arises. But in all situations, one of the problems that always comes up every time is that these populations are not capable of producing enough foods. There is a lack of food availability, and most of the foods that they consume lack nutritional quality. And so this is a problem in which I have put in a lot of time during my days at INCAP, and this is the problem that I will summarize to you in a few minutes. The problem that was initiated back in the early 50s is still of tremendous scientific interest throughout the world, as you can see by the references that I have selected at random from a number of journals. The difference between the 1950s and the 1990s is that there are more human resources now working on the problem. There are standards of quality that we did not have at the time. Newer technologies have become available to make a lot of these foods edible to people. Quite a bit of attention is being given to problems of acceptability, to make it easy for the mother to provide food to the child, the problem of energy density is another thing that has come up during the last few years. Still, the formulations that we were able to develop at that time are still very active today and have served as a model for other formulas that have been developed. Another tendency today is that a lot of efforts are being given to the possibility that many of these foods be prepared at home. However, it's a very difficult problem, a problem that requires a tremendous and very aggressive extension programs, both in production, food processing at the home level, and nutrition education. The basis for the formulations that we developed many years ago are shown in this particular graph. This is what we call a complementation system in which two foods are mixed under controlled conditions, and the result of this combination is that they will complement each other. What is lacking in one food is provided by the other and vice versa. And here we have an example of maize, common maize, and soybeans. As you can see, there is a point of maximum response in terms of nutritional quality. And we have used this type of responses not only to formulate different high-quality foods, but also to project this kind of responses to production systems, agricultural production systems, to systems of storage, so that people with some education will be able to use combinations of this kind to be able to feed themselves. The beautiful thing about this type of response is that you are able to develop a higher quality food from the two ingredients, and we have many, many examples in which two foods individually are of good quality. When they are combined, they become of a very, very high quality. So, as I mentioned, we use this type of response to formulate, and back in the 1950s, 4 mixtures or 3 mixtures were formulated, and these are shown in the following slide. The first one is formula number 9, the present in Caparina. Formula 14 is a mixture of soybeans and maize. And this product, by the name of My Soy, is being manufactured in Bolivia. And by the time I was making the slide, I did not have the nutrient, the supplementary nutrients added to it. And then we have another formula, Vitatol, which is formula 15, and this is a combination of maize, soybeans, and cottonseed. As you can see from the nutrients in the lower part of this table, from the very beginning, we felt that this formulation should be supplemented with the nutrients that we knew at that time were missing in the diets of a lot of these people in Central America. So all the mixtures are provided with vitamin A, all the mixtures are provided with iron, and of course to make up the quality of the protein, especially from cottonseed, we added lysine at a level of 0.25% of the mixture. Other nutrients are also added, like niacin, vitamin B1, B2, calcium, and phosphorus. At the beginning, we used lime-treated maize, the common form in which people consume maize in many Latin American countries, so there was no need to add calcium. However, it was difficult to obtain lime-treated maize at the industrial level at the time, so maize, regular maize, is used, and then calcium is provided. Now, this is the first formula, number 9, that came in the market. I tried to take a picture so that you will see the nutrient content right here, but I think it's going to be very difficult. That's why I had it in the previous slide. I also left the price of the product, the price that I paid when I bought this 1 pound. I actually bought a few more, but the price here says that it's selling at the local food store for 31 cents a pound. That's US cents a pound. And this material provides 23% protein and all the nutrients that you saw in the previous slide, which are also shown here. And this is a 1 pound that will provide enough servings for a family for a number of days. This is the formula made of regular maize plus cottonseed flour. The other formula that came out about, I'm sorry, I forgot to say, the Incapanina formula has gone through very difficult times because this the price is controlled by the government, and prices of maize, of cottonseed, labor, electricity has gone up, but the government did not allow it to go very high in price so that people will be able to purchase it. At the present time, they are selling very close to 1 million pounds per month, and this product is available anywhere in Guatemala and probably in some other countries. The other one that came out some 5 years ago, which is Formula 15, this is a mixture of maize, cottonseed, and soybeans. It's a very good quality formula. Here is the nutrient content, and it's a little more expensive. Its price is 37.5 cents a pound, and it's usually set next side to Incapanina so that anybody can choose either one. This is it's not as strong in flavor. The soybeans they tend to dilute a little bit the flavor of the cottonseed, but it's of a very high nutritional value. And the reason why this company decided to put out this mixture and competing with Incapanina is that it's acting as a buffer, economic buffer, so that if the government decides to keep the price of Incapanina low, they will make it up on this kind of a product. Well, another thing that we did during the last 10 years, I think, is to combine traditional processing technologies with other types of technologies to make other types of products. And so here I have the flow diagram of a process developed to make a high-quality cookie. We are starting here with a mixture of soybeans and whole maize, and this is processed by lime cooking, nixtamalization, that will introduce quite a few very attractive characteristics to the product. And the dough then is mixed with regular wheat flour on a 50% basis, dry weight. And then other additives are added like fat, sugar, baking powder, and so on, and cookies are made. These cookies then have a final composition of about 35% maize, 50% wheat flour, and 50% soybeans, which is enough to be able to bring up the protein quality of the product. Now, this cookie, the picture of them is shown right here. They weigh 28 grams. They are being made by some 60 small bakeries in 8 different states in the country, except that they are not able to produce. They were not able to produce 1,500,000 units per day, so that we then had to contract with 3 large producers, and that delivered then about 1,300,000 cookies per day to about 8,500 schools located in rural Guatemala, in 8 different places in Guatemala, and also in Guatemala City. The cookie can be flavored, of course, with orange or with vanilla, and the acceptability has been extremely good, and this program has been going on now for the last 4 years, and its impact has not been evaluated yet, but apparently things are going very well. The formula, the composition of this formula is right here per 100 grams, and one of the things that we have worried is about the protein quality. The energy density is very, very high. You can, of course, adjust that by the amount of fat that you can add to the cookie, but the problem is that during baking, losses of lysine take place, so the actual quality of the product is about 70% the value of casein. And a unit of 28 grams that children are consuming will provide the amounts of different nutrients shown in this column. So this is a product that has gone very, very well, and just recently it has been introduced into other countries in Central America. Production is beginning in El Salvador, next to Guatemala, and also in Panama, except that the formulas are a little changed. The Panamanian formula doesn't have soybeans, rather it has a cowpea that has been processed to eliminate the seed coat, so that then we can have a higher protein contribution from this legume, and also sometimes we use pigeon peas, Cajanus cajan, which is also a legume food of high productivity in the area, and it can be transformed into a very nice looking flour. Well, now moving into the same principle of extension, of extending wheat flour, for example, with a high protein food like in Caparina 9 or 14 or 15, is also being used with this type of a product. This is a more sophisticated product. There are 3 flavors here, and this is called Proteina. The Proteina formula is a 70% oat cereal grain with 30% either Formula 9 or Formula 14, I'm sorry. And it has been formulated so that it's like a common winning cereal grain, cereal food. The material is processed by very modern technologies using extrusion cooking, and of course, due to the package, to the composition, its price is a little higher, about maybe $2 a pound. So the only people that are able to afford this kind of a food are those people that have a higher economic status in the country. But the principle is the same. You know, we use a background of one of the formulas that we developed before, and we dilute a cereal grain. In this case, is oats, and so a formula like this is developed. This product has been in the market in Guatemala for maybe 15 years, and apparently it has gone very well, and is competing very nicely in terms of nutritional value, in nutrient provision, to much more expensive foods like the Gerber type of products that we have in the market. Now, going into other things, we have always felt that QPM, quality protein maize, was a really tremendous solution to the malnutrition problem in a lot of countries that consume maize. A lot of people have suggested that it is really not needed because as soon as you combine, for example, maize with beans, you developed a formula like the ones that I have shown. But the problem is that beans are very expensive, are very difficult to get, and so people don't eat beans as often as we wish they would. Furthermore, beans are never provided to children. Children begin to eat beans when they reach the age of 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and before that time, the only things that they eat are things like maize. So when opaque 2 maize was developed, and then it was improved through what is now known as QPM, we felt that it was a tremendous solution. However, we have not been able to get it into commercial production. And in discussing the possibility of using this tremendous resource with the company that makes Finca Farina, we suggested that they contract with local farmers for the production of this particular maize. And we conducted then a number of tests, the results of which are shown in this particular slide. Formula 9, that is based on common maize and cottonseed flour, has a protein quality of 64% of casein, but then if you use QPM, that is quality protein maize, the value increases to 75. That is a significant increase. Formula 14, that is based on maize and soybeans, is very good to begin with, and it's about the same with QPM, and one would expect this kind of a response because soybeans are very rich sources of lysine, and we are going to be combining that with QPM, which is also rich in lysine, so there is no improvement, but there is no change. And then Formula 15, where the soybean has been diluted with cottonseed, and we use then QPM in the formulation, there is a very significant increase in protein quality, so that these people, the producers of Finca Farina, of Vitatol, are convinced that they could really improve on the quality of the mixture that I showed at the beginning if they were able to obtain enough QPM in production in the country. And we actually tried to do this, but then there was need for seed, good quality seed, and we were not able to get it in time, so that the program died down, and we are now going back again to the possibility of bringing back into production. QPM has also been tested in the cookies, and as you would expect, the protein quality improves quite substantially. And we have made a number of other products which are very tasty, and some of these are shown here. The regular tortillas, this is the way in which we thought QPM could go in to solve some of the nutritional problems of the country. But then we developed other types of foods like these two. This is a wet type of product, very soft, it's sweet in flavor and very nice to eat, and it's very high quality, and it can be made from QPM. And then, of course, the drink that can be improved a little bit in protein content, because quality protein maize has no more protein than common maize, except that it has better protein quality, so that you can add a little bit of any source of protein, go up in protein concentration, and have a product like this, which is very tasty, very nice, very well accepted. Now, in more recent times, we have been looking at the grain of this beautiful flower. This is really a tremendous product in terms of nutritional value. It's called grain amaranth. Grain amaranth is produced in the heads of these flowers. It's a seed that was utilized by the Aztec populations in Mexico, by the Incas population in Peru, and also by the Mayan populations in Guatemala. It's a very small grain, but it has packed in it a tremendous nutritional value. During the last 8 years, we have been working with it, and we have been able to develop a number of products from it. To begin with, one use that comes out immediately by looking at the chemical composition and nutritional value of amaranth is that by a small or a very simple type of processing, you can make it into a food that is very similar, even better than a commercial winning cereal grain with milk. You see the natural composition of amaranth, about 15% protein, which is not different than that. It has a very high fat content that can be increased, very close to that, and it has a little more fiber, which can be eliminated very easily. And what is really outstanding is that the protein quality of this product is very close to casein, or maybe sometimes it's even higher than casein. It has the protein has a very high lysine content. It also has a high methionine concentration, high tryptophan, a high threonine, so that it's a natural supplement also to many cereal grains. Amaranth is not a cereal grain. So we have done studies to develop this tremendous resource a little more. I just came back last week from a meeting in Mexico on amaranth, where there is a few industries are beginning to develop to utilize it. And some of the things that we have done are shown here. For example, these are some studies in which amaranth is being mixed with cereal grains, and in this case you can see that as we increase the amount of amaranth in maize, there is an improvement in the protein quality up to the levels in amaranth, which are very, very high. This is the case between oats and amaranth, and again, as you increase the amount of amaranth into the diet, you begin to get an increase in protein quality. Wheat is probably one of the, wheat flour that is probably one of the poorest cereal grains in my opinion, and as you add more amaranth, there is more of an increase in protein quality, and sorghum, yes, it behaves very much like corn. And we have also done many other studies in which amaranth is being mixed with other protein sources, and in this case we are showing results of amaranth with beans. And again, as we add amaranth into the beans, we improve the quality of the beans because amaranth is providing methionine to the beans. Beans are very limited in methionine concentration. The same thing happens with peanut. Peanut is a good protein, however, it has limitations in lysine and sulfur amino acids, so here you have an improvement as you add more amaranth. This is the case with soybeans. This is amaranth right here, this is soybeans right there, and there is a little bit of an inflection there that may not be significant, but I think that the amaranth has more methionine than soybeans, and it will improve the quality of the soybean. And finally, here is an example that is very difficult to accept, and this is mixtures of milk and amaranth protein, and you can see that there is a very significant improvement in quality when these two sources are mixed, and we have used this type of response to formulate the product that we have called Amaralac, and is a very high quality protein food. Of course, you know, we can go on and on because the possibilities of mixing foods is very great. We have more recently been working also with the possibility of adding vegetable green materials into these formulations because of the possibility to include carotenoids in them. People don't mind having a little green thing flotating there. We have used many food legumes to make different types of products, and And of course, what we need is people that are capable of producing them and deliver them to other people for the nutrition. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. That was perfectly timed. Guess we have time for one question. Ricardo has contributed enormously to this whole concept of complementation, and this is, of course, what he was describing and its practical implications so well. But perhaps, since there's no burning question, you won't mind not answering any questions. Oh, there is, yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. What is the potential for the introduction of corn and soybeans with altered amino acid profiles in crops?
Well, what is it? I didn't get it.
Could you just repeat that a moment?
Yeah, what's the potential for bringing in altered corn and soybeans with would improve the amino acid profiles, such as we're doing here at Iowa State, to feed people in Central America?
What are the problems with respect to the introduction of these new?
Yes. Well, actually, at the present time, there is no problem with the introduction of almost anything. Back in the 1950s, no one really thought that you could produce soybeans in the tropics, in Central America, for example. But now, this is a common practice, and even though we are a very small country, we have a significant amount of soybeans being produced in the country, so that we are not importing as much soybeans as we used to do before. Most of those soybeans, of course, go to the poultry industry, and they are processed for poultry feeds. But we have very, very good varieties yielding amounts of seed as good as any yield that you can think of with technologies that we have introduced either from the United States or from Brazil. Now, with QPM, it's a different question, you know. People don't buy nutrition, you know. I mean, you begin to buy nutrition when you have a certain level of education, then you begin to look at the labels. People like to fill their stomachs, and nutrition doesn't mean too much to them, you know. So that the approach to introduce these things is completely different. And that's why we made a lot of efforts to have industry develop food products that could be associated with agricultural producers, you know, so that one could control the quality and so on, and then the industrial people would make it into the desirable product.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think in view of time, I'd like to thank you for your contribution. I was informed during the coffee break that if I ran this session significantly over time, they would take the World Food Prize back from Nevin, since he, in a weak moment, offered to share the check with me. Did you? I've forgotten, Nevin. I'm not going to run badly over time. I hope you have found this morning's presentations to be informative and exciting. I certainly have, and I'd like to thank all of the speakers for doing such a good job. And I'd like to say, again, a big thank you to you, Nevin, for giving us the reason for meeting in this gorgeous auditorium. And finally, I would like to thank you, Provost Swan, and your university for serving as such a gracious host this morning. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I have just one announcement. Please remind those invited to lunch with Dr. Scrimshaw to proceed to lunch immediately so that guests will have time to eat and then pop off to the airport. Lunch for everybody else, I guess, will be upstairs somewhere. I actually hesitate to even mention it's time to eat again after all of these major problems that we've been discussing this morning. But thank you very much, ladies.